In a world where even the smallest disagreements can lead to arguments, violence, and even death, two brothers tackle the difficult subjects. This podcast is not just about dissecting topics from two different perspectives. It's also about how to have conversations on difficult topics while avoiding the urge to tear someone's head off and vomit down the bloody stump of their neck.
I am.
All right, so change of plan. We're instead of talking about gasoline, we're going to postpone that argument. I just proposed this to Colin a few minutes ago, and we haven't really given it a whole lot of thought. But we're talking about the corporate responsibilities, specifically with social media companies. You know, what sort of corporate responsibility do they have for the content that is being put out there on their platforms? Do they have any sort of corporate responsibility? And what that might look like from a libertarian's perspective and a liberal's perspective. But also, I don't feel like Colin and I really fall into those very strict categories. But I just, you know, we do tend to favor, I guess, those two perspectives. So if do you want to start, Colin, or you want me to lay out some of the groundwork?
Yeah, go ahead if you want to start first this time.
Okay, so the reason why this came to me, and I wanted to pay attention to it, was that right now we have the Russian invasion of Ukraine, and Facebook has relaxed some of, or Instagram, or same thing, had relaxed some of their rules as far as calls to violence. And they're saying it's now considered acceptable for Ukrainians to, and there's still some limitations about how they can phrase things, but because of the attack on the Ukrainian land by the Russians, that there are certain circumstances and certain phrasings that is now acceptable to have some stronger language. And it got me thinking about how complex all this is, and how there, you know, it really does require a lot of oversight. And, you know, is this a game or a responsibility that social media in general, and Facebook in particular, really should have? Is it something that and what should their responsibilities be with that sort of thing, and what kind of limitations they have? So my basic thought is, I feel like we're in a situation right now where there is too much responsibility placed on these companies. Whenever someone behaves badly, there's calls that these people need to be deplatformed. And I do think that there is a time and a place for extreme examples of or when people behave extremely in an extreme manner, that maybe they should be kicked off, because the companies do have a terms of service that we're all expected to follow. But I feel like we're in an environment right now where we're too quick to expect the companies to limit access or remove content, or even remove the participants from their platform, is my feeling.
Yeah, I think that's definitely true. You know, as far as what a company can do, they can do whatever they want. And so I don't think the government should step in and say that they have to do something or not do something else unless it really infringes on somebody's, well, you know, it's interesting. Even if it infringes on their right to, shall we say, free speech, you know, if you decided as a company, I don't want this, you know, type of person or these people with these viewpoints on my platform, you could kick them off, and I think you'd be fine doing that. As far as a social responsibility or a moral responsibility, I do think they have been too quick in the past to try and deplatform people, and they should allow people their free speech and say, hey, you know, we're just you know, a mouthpiece. And I get that some people are going to speak on here that disagree with you, but that's the country we live in. That's free speech, and so we allow it to everybody. And you know, there are counterpoints up there, and you can put those counterpoints up there if you want. I think they've been far too fast to restrict people and try and deplatform people. And I think and I think that comes from, to some degree, a movement in our country that, you know, people feel like we've gotten to the point where people seem to feel that words can be violence and thoughts can be violence. And in the same way that we would address, for example, I think, free speech is allowed, but if somebody threatens violence or actually hurts somebody, then, or calls for somebody to be physically hurt, then, that steps beyond the right of free speech. And so, we should be careful with these people, or these platforms, these companies should be very careful and allow people the opportunity to spread misinformation, in the sense that we don't know what misinformation is until we talk about it. And even if we disagree with somebody, we shouldn't just be so quick to deplatform them, but to counter their arguments, I think, is where these companies should probably be.
Yeah. Kind of a side note as far as technical issues. When you're moving the laptop around, Colin, it creates a little bit of not feedback, but some outside noise that makes it difficult to hear you. So if you could, if possible, just to try and stabilize the computer a little bit, would be great. Yeah, and I do agree with you. I think that if we go back to even just 5 or 7 years ago, when Facebook, our feed was filled with the people that we had friended on Facebook. And I'm referring to them in particular because they're, I think, the largest social media company that's around right now, and one of the earlier ones that's still around. And so back in those days, our feed was filled with people that we had opted to hear from. And then they started to incorporate ads. And the big change, I feel, happened when they started to use their own systems as to try and put in things they think that we might be interested in. And then they began to incorporate news as well. And then that line of what is news and what is opinion began to get very blurry. And people began to pay to have some of their content put into the feed. And so now we had in this listing of posts that were out there, it's not just, Aunt May's kitty cat and our niece's first day of school or whatever it might be. Now we're also getting all this other content that we didn't necessarily opt into, because when it used to be just friends and family, well, if we have the crazy libertarian that we just don't want to hear anymore, we could silence him, we could unfriend him, we could block him, or whatever it is we wanted to do. And we, once Facebook began to add some other content, we no longer had the ability to control so well what was in our feed. And so in Facebook and trying to monetize the experience, I think they created their own monster by now having to curate or at least create some rules as to what can and cannot be posted, because we no longer can control that environment.
Yeah, I agree. And I wonder if, that algorithm that they have, each one of these social media companies, the algorithm they have is so powerful because it can have an effect on what people are talking about, what people believe, those types of things. And so on the, at first glance, you think, well, why not just open it up and just say, hey, this is how we decide what's going to be in front of you. You can control it or you can't. And even if they said, sorry, I'm just getting a call here. Even if they said something like, listen, we're still going to have ads. You can't shut that off. That's how we make our money. And you can't control it completely, but this is how it works. So that people could analyze it. Okay, they're being fair. They're not favoring one side or the other. They're kind of going off of our preferences, something like that. I guess they would, and I guess, in doing that, there's two problems. One, they open themselves up to great criticism for somebody to say, well, it's unfair because of this. They'd make all sorts of arguments. And then the other issue they would have is then it points out how much of all of those feeds are filled by paid advertising, because ideally you would just say, hey, just create an algorithm, make it somewhat basic, let us see things, turn off the ads if you want, or maybe say something like, you can turn off the ads if you pay a fee or something like that, but they just don't want to do that. Maybe there's just too much money in it for them to do it the way that they're doing.
Yeah. Now, I'm sure you've heard the old expression that if you can't find the product, you are the product. And particularly talking about social media. Colin, would you pay to have an ad-free social media experience, or do you consider the ads as necessary because you're not going to pay for it?
I don't really use social media.
Oh, right.
I do. I look at Google, and a lot of the Google that I look at is through DuckDuckGo because I want it to be somewhat anonymous experience. It's a little. I get a little creeped out by it. I'm not sure if my phone is listening to me, but sometimes it really feels like my phone is listening to me. And sometimes we'll be talking, and and it's difficult. Because the reason why I'm not sure is because I can't tell if I'm just being. I'm not typically a conspiracy theorist, but I'll be talking with somebody. Randy and I will talk with somebody about something, and then I'll get an ad on my phone about it. Mm-hmm. And I think, man, I don't remember looking on Google for that. How did it know to look, to bring that up to me? I didn't talk about that, or I just talked about it. That's it. Now there is the possibility that maybe I looked at it and I kind of forgot because we're doing so much, or Randy looked at it and it knew we were together, or maybe we're Facebook friends with the person we were talking to. But it's crazy, so I get a little freaked out by that, and I do read Twitter. And I do like some stuff on Twitter, but I don't post anything. I think I've made 2 Facebook posts in my life. And that was because, it was like supporting somebody that had gone through something terrible, like an accident or something. I just don't do that. So I definitely wouldn't pay for it. And if there were any cost to Twitter, I would be off. But I'm not your typical consumer.
Right.
I think differently than most consumers.
Now, I briefly touched on this subject with my wife, Chris, and one of the things that she brought up is that she feels strongly that the curation and the oversight from the company is very important, from the perspective of a woman that has been in environments where she has felt sexually intimidated or just generally intimidated, or there's, if her feeling is that there are some men, if they don't feel like there's the possibility of punishment, that they can act in any way that will, that they want. And I would think that for you as a parent, there probably is going to be also a little bit of concern, when you're not able to look over your child's shoulder. Are they putting themselves in risk by being in social media in some way? So what are your feelings on oversight and safety?
I think that's a pretty easy one to solve. I mean, I would think it would be easy for the most part, because when somebody complains, they should address it, look at what was done. It should be pretty easy. It's all recorded, as far as, if you're looking at Facebook or whatever, like, they entered the information so we could see what happened, and restrict people from interaction with other people. As far as my kids, I am on social media so little, and I don't think it's healthy at all. I think it's very dangerous for kids to be on social media. Even the parts of it that we don't think of typically as dangerous, just the fact that people are looking for likes and thumbs up or whatever it is. Mm-hmm. I think that's a dangerous place. Like when there's kids in school and they post something and they're, some other girl that they know or some other guy that they know gets 100 likes or 1,000 likes and they get 2, that can be disastrous. So I don't even want them to participate in that stuff until they're old enough to handle that, and be much more mature about it. There should be some moderation. I think that goes to kind of what we were talking about before. If anybody feels uncomfortable, they should be able to lodge a complaint and then be kept safe from that person. It would, it's not going to be a perfect system, because they could just come back and create a new account, and they could probably find a way to circumvent that moderation. But I think, that's where it should come from. If I or Chris or you or anybody felt uncomfortable, there definitely should be a governing body that comes in and that you can go to them and say, hey, I don't want to have to interact with this person ever again, and that should be handled in that way, I think.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I think technology is a pretty powerful tool, and I would be willing to bet if you put the responsibility on the companies to find solutions to some of these problems, I bet they could come up with a solution that we hadn't even considered. One thing that might be effective is to have different levels of exposure to the world. I mean, right now you can limit as to who can see your profile, who can see some of your posts, and to have that same sort of filter of people that can have the opportunity to interact with you, so that you create a very strong wall between you and the outside world. And I'm sure that some of these companies could find even more effective ways. And if they're worried about losing monetization, to offer people the opportunity to be able to pay for some of that security or secrecy, or however you want to do it. Because I do agree with you. I do feel like they've gotten to the one, people are let me start over again. When we were hearing about casinos hiring psychologists, psychiatrists as ways to keep the people involved in the gambling, things like the bells and the lights that people tend to gravitate towards, the small wins, the little dopamine triggers that they would incorporate. It was all very interesting from afar, because it's not a world that I involved in, and I'm pretty sure you don't either get involved in. And then we start seeing the same things happening in Silicon Valley with the social media, using the same techniques. Now we're seeing, even if you or I, we don't use a lot of social media, don't really feel it, I'm sure people that can't seem to get out of their phone, because they're looking for those dopamine hits, the triggers, the another like, another comment, another positive reinforcement from a friend or whatever. And now it seems a little more insidious, dangerous, when it's put in that environment than it was when it was in a casino, off the beaten path. And so I think that one option would be to actually open up the world a little bit more, open up the social media, rather than closing it down and putting in tighter restrictions and putting on more limitations and having more corporate oversight. I feel like we've gone too far in that direction, and that if there was more openness, people would then perhaps even opt out of some of the social media, rather than looking to have Mark Zuckerberg or whoever else to dictate the rules of engagement, which is kind of how it is right now.
Yeah, I totally agree, but I'm not sure why. I think the biggest problem we have right now is there appears to be an effort, I guess there's a danger of looking at it from one side of the argument, but it appears to be a danger now that the social media companies tend to want to control what is said, and it seems to be a reach for controlling more people on the right, more conservative viewpoints than on the left. And so I'm not sure how much that has to do with likes and dislikes, but yeah, I think they should just step back, let people do what they want, let people have some control over what access they want to allow the social media companies into their lives. It's going to be hard for the current players to do this because they have so much to lose, so much money to lose. Mm-hmm. But at some point there'll be a DuckDuckGo type of company to come along and say, hey, listen, you can participate and we'll control it for you, and we'll curate it for you a little bit, or not curate it at all, or whatever you want. You can have some more control over it, because they just don't seem to want to right now. The only thing they're really controlling for is, it seems like they tend to disagree with people, and if they disagree with them, then they tend to shut them down. But then, I don't know, they're kind of selectively looking to enforce things on certain parts of their platforms, if that makes any sense.
You're talking about the platforms, the shutting people down they disagree with?
Yes. Yeah, I don't think the government's doing much with it, and I think that's right. I think the platforms, for some reason, they're wanting to step in, and I guess people look to them and say, well, you shouldn't allow misinformation on your platform. And they say, okay, well, we'll curate to some degree, or we'll control. If we have somebody that seems to say something really crazy, we'll take those down, when they should probably just step back, let people say whatever they want, and then you just unfollow them, or say, I want to mute them, or whatever, something like that.
One of my favorite science fiction authors is a man named Neil Stephenson, and he addressed this problem in the particular story he was writing about. There was some deep fake videos that were they were fake, but they were nearly impossible to tell that they were fake, and someone was having real trouble in real life because of these videos that had surfaced, and the solution was to actually overwhelm the social media platforms with a bunch of deep fakes. And they created these bots that were just a barrage of deep fakes. And so now, instead of people seeing a bunch of pictures and videos and assuming most of them are true, so probably the one I'm looking at is true, the opposite would happen, where they would see all these pictures and videos and assume most of them are false. And so therefore the one I'm looking at is probably false. So the solution was just to take it to the extreme. And I mean, it would change the entire world of social media, where you would then, instead of looking to social media like Facebook for your information, because there's such a low bar of entry right now, you start to look to the curated sites like the Washington Post, the Wall Street Journals, the Fox Newses. Even if you don't agree with what even if I don't like what they're saying, at least I know someone's filtering as to what they're saying. At least I assume somebody is. Sometimes it doesn't seem that way.
No, it doesn't.
but Facebook, anybody can put anything out, and I can make it look professional. I can make it look slick. I can give myself a nice backdrop and put on a suit and tie and sound very articulate. And someone that doesn't know me would think, well, he must be an academic, a scientist, whatever it might be. Whereas the alternative then is to go to someone that is creating a gate and becoming a gatekeeper.
Yeah, I mean, maybe something like that would work. It is amazing to me, because if I were Facebook, you and I talked about the power of Facebook in the past, and man, they're just so powerful. But to me, it could be so fleeting. I mean, it wouldn't take much for them to lose market share in a drastic fashion. I mean, my guess is if something does happen and they lose it, they'll lose it pretty drastically and precipitously. It won't be, some small reduction in their influence. It'll probably happen quickly. It is my guess. So, and given the fact that they had those problems with Cambridge Analytica and other things, like people are starting to realize that they are a little bit insidious, as you mentioned before, that they are a little bit dangerous, but they don't seem to care. They don't. Yeah. It doesn't seem to be reducing their influence in any way. But I imagine at some point they'll do something that's stupid enough that it will have a big enough effect that people will start to look for other platforms. Maybe it would be something like this, a whole bunch of deep fakes that just attack the credibility of the whole platform or something like that. But yeah, we'll see what happens. If they're and what they could do to combat that is just to say, hey, we'll be more transparent. We've learned, and we're going to be more transparent, and we're going to open things up to you guys, and you'll have more control, and maybe that'll be good in the long run, because now it is one of those things that is so dangerous. But to me, it's like anything else. It's like drinking. It's like smoking. It's like driving. It can be, well, I guess smoking is probably never a good thing, but drinking isn't the worst thing in the world. It's just very few people seem to be able to control it in the long term. So I'd recommend you stay away from it. Facebook doesn't have to be the worst thing in the world, and it seems to overtake people's lives and affect their psyches. So I'd recommend to stay away from it. But yeah, if they were wise, they would step back, remove some of the control that they're trying to exert, and I think it would be much better for people.
Of course, you and I are old enough to remember a time when people talked about the dangers of television. The boob tube. Our parents wouldn't let us watch after school and limited times on the weekends because they were just turning our brains into mush. And so the argument has now shifted from the problems of television to the problems of social media. And I'm sure when our children are our age, there's going to be some new problems, some new social media or viral content that's killing your brains.
Yeah, you may be right. I don't know. It does seem like, yeah, maybe. I mean, TV can take over people's lives to some degree, but man, this social media, it seems like there's a pretty big correlation between the emotional well-being of young kids and somebody was showing the correlation. I think it was Jordan Peterson was showing the correlation between when they started using likes on Facebook and how many of these young kids were being submitted to hospitals because they were inflicting self-harm. And it's a scary thing. Like, I think this is, if there's something that's dangerous, we should at least be aware of this one. It is a pretty dangerous thing. You know what I mean? I think, I don't want to downplay that side of it. I think, for adults, but even for adults, I think it has an effect on us too. I don't know. It takes a pretty, I wouldn't say a strong person. It takes a pretty unique person not to be affected by those things. As Randy and I, we have the business and we get responses to the business on social media. It can affect us, and we realize that's kind of a separate thing, but it feels like a personal attack. It's hard if you don't get enough likes, or if somebody makes a mean comment that to them was just an offhanded comment.
Right.
It can be powerful. It's really, this is such an interactive thing. It's a dangerous thing.
Yeah, you're right. It's funny interesting as a business owner. I have a newfound respect for the review and the stars. When I was just a consumer, I was so much more cavalier and lighthearted about the whole thing and about me. I'm sure it wasn't their fault, but there was something about the business I didn't like, so I'm going to knock a star off. Whereas now, when I write a review, I'm a lot more compassionate. I'm still honest, but because I also look at it from the consumer's perspective. Whereas if I were a consumer going into a bad business, I'd want the warning. But I try and be more understanding for the business owner if there is something that maybe they weren't aware of, or something that maybe they had good intentions and it just didn't work out correctly. When you've been reviewed in that way, you tend to look at it a little differently than just being the reviewer.
Yeah, I give a lot more reviews and a lot more 5-star reviews now than I ever had in the past, because and you see the effort, you realize what it takes to go and do something like that. Like, man, it's not easy. And if you have employees, you can't be there every second of every day making sure that they know exactly how to do everything, and something that you would have thought I wouldn't have to train them on, but you realize, oh shoot, yeah, I have to tell them that they need to be nice to a customer or respond well to a irate customer. Hey, to see it from their perspective, It's tough. And so, yeah, my viewpoint on that, like yours, has changed pretty drastically. But maybe that's part of the problem with, social media in general is it's, as I think so many people have said, yeah, you can just go and hurl your vitriol at people out there, and you don't have to see them face to face and worry too much about the repercussions and everything else. It's so far removed. So I think that's one of the things that makes it, a dangerous place, more so than a TV or something else, because, these things can affect people personally, and the more their emotional well-being, their psyche, and everything else. So, it's an interesting time, and you wonder, hopefully we can make good use. It's a great tool. And hopefully we can make good use of it and make it safe for people.
Yeah. It's a business model that didn't exist 10 years ago, and so that not only are the companies navigating new territory, the consumers, the regulating agencies, everyone is trying to figure out how to make this whole thing work. And I think everybody would feel that we want as little interference as possible, but recognizing that there's always needs to be some, whether it's from our corporate overlords, our government overseers, whoever it is that that is coming in to try and keep the world a safe place. And we're still trying to work this one out. It's new. We'll figure it out eventually. But I think there has to be reactions. There has to be. You brought up that point earlier in one of our other conversations about setting benchmarks. Are we achieving the goal we'd intended to achieve? Are there things we can do to improve the experience, to make the experience safer, to make the experience more enjoyable? And can we make the experience profitable for us, the business? Because of course, that's the ultimate goal for a business, is to be profitable. And I think that with some care, all of that can be achieved. But there has to be an eye, at least partially, on those other aspects, not just on the bottom line.
Yeah, I mean, it really seems to me, and I don't know if it's probably naive at least to think that they would do it, but man, if they just opened up the algorithm a bit and gave you some controls over what you saw and what you didn't, but I guess their valuation would just fall so precipitously. It would be, and it's a publicly traded company. Do you have the right as a CEO or a board to go in and just say, hey, we're going to make the right choice, even though it's not going to be in the best interest of the shareholders?
Right.
Because you would make a lot less money. But yeah, to open that up and be so transparent would be a great thing.
Well, and also, I'm sure you've run across this where you end up in an echo chamber, where you there was a while where you might believe that everyone agreed with you because all you were seeing was the same opinion as yours. And then we learned that there was this algorithm out there that existed that was feeding us some of the same information or related information that they understood that we might have an understanding of, an appreciation of. And I think there's value to receiving conflicting information. Some people like the Giants. Some people like the Jets. And if all you see are Giants posts, you might think the Jets are garbage until you watch them until you go to game day and see how they actually play. And so there's value to getting an opinion that doesn't align with ours, and we've lost that with social media.
Well, and to add to that, there is a real you start to see these people partly because just the people that they think that you would follow or that you happen to like are attacking or vilifying a certain group of people. And then you think, well, there must be a whole bunch of those people out there. But then you find out, oh, they have a greater voice on social media, partly because the people that I follow are just talking about them a lot,
Yeah.
Or you get an idea that maybe the world is worse off than it is, or, has gone in a terrible direction, but then you realize, no, we're just talking about it a ton on social media. Almost like the news. When you watch the news and you think, oh, it's so dangerous to go in the ocean. There's sharks out there. Oh, well, it happens. You're more likely to get struck by lightning, it turns out,
Right. Yeah, that's definitely true. And sometimes the people that always have the camera on them or always have the microphone in their hand, like you say, their opinion their perspective might be a minority perspective, but because all we do is hear them, it's not actually true. And I feel like there's certain politicians that are doing a very good job of keeping the camera on them. And so all we do is hear their voice. And if you weren't careful, you might believe that whatever that politician is, that all the politicians of the party feel the same way, because that one politician is always speaking and always speaking loudly.
Right. Yeah, for sure.
Well, I think that, it was good to have a conversation that you and I both more or less agree on, because we do tend to, more often than not, take different sides. And what was interesting about this one, there was a time or two where I found myself instinctively wanting to disagree with you, because it happened so often, and then saying, oh, wait a second, I don't have to disagree. I can actually agree. There may be a small point I disagree with, but I agree with over most of it, so why not just go ahead and agree on this one? There we go. Oh.
Yeah, that's interesting.
All right, so gasoline next time? Gasoline prices, gasoline availability?
Yeah.
Okay. Good. Anything else you want to say on this particular topic, or you feel like we covered it?
I think we're good.
All right, awesome. Thanks, Colin.
All right.
We hope you learned something in this episode of Brother versus Brother, a podcast about difficult conversations. We also hope that you enjoyed it enough to subscribe to the podcast. You can help us by spreading the word. Share this episode on your favorite social media so that others will have an opportunity to experience it as well. You can also support us by donating through Patreon. This information and more can be found on our website, broconvo.com, and on our various social media accounts. Thank you.